Alejandro Jodorowsky was the best filmmaker of all times, a versatile genius who goes to the bone. Son of rejection, he managed to reinvent himself through a long process of artistic catharsis. His experience with shamans led him to invent the psychomagic. The idea is the following. Shamans act in the unconscious of people by suggestion, by invoking divinities or beings from another world. Although they know that they are cheating. But in many cases, when there is a psychosomatic element in the sickness, and when faith is able to influence, they actually heal, they cure by suggestion. For example, a patient was sick because she couldn't free herself from the memory of her hated ex-former husband. Jodorowsky should suggest that she put a photo of her husband in a box and make sheet on the picture, sending it by mail to her ex-husband. Jodorowsky himself sent to his father a box with a picture under a melon that he had ripped to pieces with a knife. We may have questions about how effective are these acts of psychomagic, but there seems to be a neurophysiological basis on it. I remember that the great American neuroscientist Ramachandran invented a machine to cure the phantom limb pains, which consisted of a simple mirror. The phantom limb pains because it finds itself trapped, hooked, unable to move. The patient moves the actual member and sees the mirror. In the mirror, the member that moves in the place of the phantom limb, who he knows that does not exist. He knows, but his unconscious does not know. Despite this unconscious register this optical illusion as the actual movement of the phantom limb amputated, which now becomes free, disappearing with it the pain. This experience seems to me a neurological vindication of Jodorowsky's theory. Next to the psychomagic, Jodorowsky has built a kind of philosophy of life. This philosophy derives mainly from his study of family trees. For him, the society makes us prisoners of a false ego. We are, or strive to be, what our parents and family, but our grandparents and beyond them, our own cultural milieu. All this, he thinks, is limiting, if not what would be eliminator, capable of becoming our real self. This makes us incapable of find how we really are, to find an independent, something mysterious that he calls essential self. A true self that I guess to be a lone independent ego, what isn't always advisable. But what would be this essential ego? My impression is that it is something built, constructed, unconsciously constructed. The usual self is built by the family, by fixations of early experiences and memories that will ultimately drive our thoughts and actions. But if you imagine that these experiences and memories are magnified by cultural additions, almost without end, by artistic additions, like those of Jodorowsky as an artist, the self that directs our thoughts and our actions, or his thoughts and his actions, will be much broader, without floating in the consciousness. This would be what he calls the essential self, not as mysterious, maybe. Or if these were really mysterious, then this would be without value, senseless. What's more limited is for him the family, the society, the religion, the homeland. The only way for us to find ourselves is the liberation of all this, as did Jodorowsky himself. His country, he says, are his shoes. Although Jew, he has no religion and finds the circumcision an absurd. He is an atheist mystic. This is a philosophy that blends well with our contemporaneity, I think. His ethics is something Spinozian. It's based on the principle that nothing should be for ourselves that were not to the others. Naturally, the artists have more rights because he can cheat and so on, because he does more for the others. But this is not something that he says. Well, we should be for ourselves, not for ourselves, that is not for the others. That what we don't give, we don't get. That all that we really need is the essential, which is precisely what we very often lack. And for him, the metaphysical purpose of human life is to become the consciousness of the universe. We are very far from this, because he thinks that our present world is a world without art and a sick world. I want to say something about his films. The best are sometimes extremely violent and deeply metaphorical. If you do not realize that this violence is a multiply interpretable metaphor which aims to expand your consciousness, making you able to understand the world better, you reject it as something brutal, perverse, bizarre. None of them are the films from Jodorowsky. He reminds us that violence is part of life. A birth is violence, death is a violence. The great art, the Greek tragedy and Shakespeare are violence, we could add. But it's not gratuitous violence. It's not like the daily conditioned childish aggressiveness that we see in the truly depressing Hollywood films, for example. Films in which, insists Jodorowsky, you enter as a moron and you go out as a moron. It is about liberating violence, able to deepen our view of things. An example can be seen in the movie The Holy Mountain. A police chief of a totalitarian chief of a totalitarian state collect the testicles of his officers. To become an officer, a candidate should have the great honor of having his testicles removed in cold blood in the public square, hearing the sound of 1,000 knights drumming their drums in a show with Nazi symbols. After the ceremony, the balls are placed in a glass jug with chloroform in order to be part of the large collection of 1,000 testicles of the Polish chef. The images would be mere bad taste if they weren't a powerful critic metaphor regarding the perversion of power which emasculate its followers, limiting both their actions and their minds. Chomsky noted correctly that all power needs to be constantly watched, because the frequent destiny of the uncontrolled power is the degeneration into some form of perversion. Another good example is in the movie Santa Sangre, Holy Blood. He finds the best film, and I find too. In this film, a boy sees his adulterous father cut both arms. He is a Knifewerfer. Cut both arms of his mother, who had drawn sulfuric acid into his penis, his body, and then the father commits suicide. When the boy becomes an adult, he let his arms act as those of his mother, as he were hypnotized. He gets behind her and her actions, and his are synchronous, as if one could guess the thoughts of the other. In some acts they agree, as in the extraordinary theatrical performances of the mother, when they play piano, for example. She sings and he plays with the arms, his arms, the back of the mother. And there is more about this. I think they are lovers too. Well, in some acts they agree. In the theatrical performances, the mother is a wicked person, a somewhat mad person. And in other acts they disagree, as when his mother decides to take revenge on other women committing murders with the arms of her son. This can be a metaphor concerning the ways the poor, this certainly is a metaphor concerning the ways the power of will of those who we love have on our own thoughts, decisions and acts, sometimes in a positive way, but sometimes in a bad or very bad way. The polysemy is the mark of the aesthetic metaphor. The best films are those already cited, with Eutopo, that about it I didn't speak. There are certainly limits. The mystical element is for me somewhat escapist. There is a hyper-symbolism that doesn't tell me very much, and the plots are weak. But art doesn't have to be perfect. Shakespeare is there to prove it. It is said, moreover, that Shakespeare, in the absence of anything better, hung a banner on the stage where it was said "cabinet," and people understood. What mattered was the message. Jodorowsky is our Shakespeare.